to start things off by saying that thank God the AP exams are over. I think we're all glad those are finally done. And today I'm going to give you a speech that will help you review for the final. And I'll be covering women's rights, nothing on FDR, and Reconstruction. No, I'm joking, thank God. I am not doing that again, and I never want to see that again in my life. Instead, I'll be covering the bank war. And no, the bank war is not Bernie Sanders fighting Wall Street. The bank war happened in like the 1800s, so at the time Bernie Sanders was only like 34 around then. Wasn't really involved in politics yet, but someone was involved in politics, and that was Andrew Jackson. And now Jackson was elected on like being good for the common man. He wanted to help out the common man, and he thought that the banks were unconstitutional because they had too much power. Because, you know, when have banks having power and able to support themselves ever hurt poor people? I mean, like, well, I guess banks actually can help poor people. Who knew? Andrew Jackson didn't. So he began targeting the banks, and Beidel came up to him, who was the president of the National Bank, and he was like, all right, let's talk this out, you know. So they both went to Congress, and Jackson, at this point, started doing some historical roasting. He called the bank a hydra of corruption, and he said the very paranoid statement of, the bank is coming after me, Mr. Buren. I have to kill it before it kills me. I don't know how a bank actually kills someone, but Jackson really was scared. So at this point, opposition started coming. Henry Clay came about, the immortal Henry Clay, and he started leading an opposition towards Jackson about this whole being against the National Bank. And this only caused Jackson to double down and veto the recharting of the National Bank, which really didn't end up surprising anyone. And this really went aside on Thomas Jefferson if you read what the veto said. Because essentially, Jackson's argument was this. He was like, all right, when the president acts for the people, he can act without talking to the Supreme Court, without talking to Congress, and that really doesn't matter when you're acting for the good of the people. Now, I'm not one to say whether something is constitutional or unconstitutional, but I'm pretty sure Thomas Jefferson, with his fear of monarchy, would have had a heart attack over this. And now, so Jackson starts withdrawing the money from the banks. They end up really losing a ton of money. And so he actually has to ask the Secretary of the Treasury, be like, remove all capital from the banks. And Treasury's like, no, I have to ask Congress first. And so Jackson did the reasonable thing and fired him. This continued 3 times until he found a puppet who would actually do it, and the banks ended up closing. So at this point, we're like, what now? There's not a bank, and actually, nothing happened. Yeah, we fought a civil war without a bank. We had Reconstruction without a bank. We had industrialization without a national bank. And there were many financial crises here, and it doesn't take much to really connect the dots of why some of these things happened. So, you know, I've been roasting Jackson's policies a lot in this speech, but I really think if we change the perspective, it can show you a lot about history, and you really think through these things in his eyes. And now Jackson really wasn't that much of a politician before being elected to the presidency. He was a war hero. All he knew was war. He was the general who led the Battle of New Orleans, and he was elected to the presidency, and he did what he thought was right based on his knowledge, and he did what he thought would help the people. And you know what? That actually does sound like a good man. He had no idea that would destabilize the economy. How was he supposed to know? And I really think if you base someone based on the why they thought they were doing something, or the consequences of their actions, that can really change how you view history. And I won't try to persuade you to view either way, but I'll leave you with one final story before I end this speech. So in the early 1900s, there were, of course, financial crises, like usual, but this time the U.S. finally decided to reinstitute the National Bank, and they created the Federal Reserve, which, you know, still exists today. And they decided to issue paper money that would have various historical figures to be honored, like Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, the usual. But a more ironic legacy could not be had on the $20 bill that proudly showed Jackson's face. Thank you.